Hello and welcome back to another flute tip of the week. I've been really sick this past week, probably the first time I've had the flu in about 3 years, really. Amazingly, I don't get sick very often. I just wake up with bruises everywhere for no apparent reason. I wasn't able to play the flute that much last week, and so what it did was it got me thinking about what I would talk about for this week's video. One thing that I haven't had the chance to really go into yet is one of the most important things when it comes to playing the flute, or any instrument really, your hand position. So, let's talk to the hands. When you master hand position, your technique will fly much easier, allowing you to focus more on musicality. Always the first thing that I talk about with any student, whether or not I am their first teacher or I've inherited them from someone else, is hand position. It is the most important aspect of any instrument, and it's just as important on the flute. First off, one of the most important things to do is just to find something that is comfortable and will allow your muscles to be nice and relaxed so you can control them much easier. One of the easiest ways to think about how your fingers are going to be bent on the flute is to imagine them being lightly placed on it away from you. So you're just going to put your hand lightly on top there. And instead of having your fingers clawed like cats, have them loose like bananas. Another part that's going to help with keeping your fingers nicely bent is remembering that the contact of your fingers should be with the center of the pads rather than using the tips of your fingers. If you use the tips of your fingers, it means that you have to have your wrist a lot closer in and you have to be attacking the keys with very clawed fingers, and just doing this is quite tight. You're not rock climbing. You're playing the flute. If you look at your finger, you'll see that you have a dip right there. And that is exactly where your fingers should be touching the keys. This is especially important if you play an open hole flute, because this gives you the biggest surface area for covering the holes so that no air leaks out and you don't lose your sound. It's much harder to be able to seal everything properly if you're trying to use the tips of your fingers, because the tips only have about a centimeter of contact space. Meanwhile, your pads, not only do they have a lot more surface area, but they spread when you put them on stuff. If you look at your fingers, try putting them on the table in front of you, completely flat down, and watch how much more space your fingers will cover if you're using your pads to contact it. Next, one thing that is really going to help you in terms of having your fingers nicely bent and having your pads touching the keys rather than the tips is going to be the position of your thumbs. With our left thumb, we need to be able to have the mobility to switch between C, B, and B flat, but also we need to make sure that the height of our thumb against the flute is going to be enough to keep your ring finger on your left hand comfortably bent and allow your pinky to rest lightly on the A flat key. So the easiest way to think about how to use your thumb and where to place it against the key is to look at it and see where you have this little line. That's where your bone is closest to the skin on your thumb, and also it's a pretty good measure of where on the flute will make it so that your fingers are nicely curved. A lot of people very frequently will use the tip of their thumb. However, when you do this, it means that you have to have your thumb quite far down and almost locked into your wrist to be able to just use the tip of your thumb. It's another case of learning to use the wide part of your finger rather than trying to just always control everything with the tips. This is what happens when you use computers too much. So instead of having your thumb at the tip, you're going to have it so that that line in the center of your thumb is what is in contact with the paddle. And when you have it set up like this, not only does it give you much better support to keep your flute very steady, but also look at how it works with your fingers. It keeps everything really comfortable and nicely curved. This will be especially important if you play on an inline flute. I personally think that it's better to use an offset G just because it more naturally follows the curve of your hand. But for those people who are traditionalist or simply prefer the feel of an inline G, then having your thumb in this position will help so much. It just brings everything in closer and allows you to have your wrist a little bit more loose. Now let's talk about the right thumb. So opposite of your left thumb, your right thumb never is supposed to leave the flute. Never. This is actually one of the most important parts of actually keeping the flute on your face. Because when you're setting up, you have 3 points of contact. Obviously, underneath your lip. Then you have what I call the flute shelf. And you can see I kind of have a bit of a bump there now from years of flute playing. But that is where the second point of contact comes in. And then when you bring in your right hand, your right thumb keeps everything properly in line and also allows you to spread out the weight of the flute so that it's not all on one hand or the other. So it's important to be able to feel the control in your hand positions so that you're able to actually hold it with one hand or just the other. Kind of scary, but it's easy to do when you have your thumb in the right place. So the best way to think about how to have your thumb down is to imagine exactly where in relation to your index finger is going to be. So instead of having your thumb in the middle of your hand or too far out to the side, which also will cause a lot of strain in the muscle there, you want to have it slightly underneath the flute, but more behind and underneath your index finger. The reason why it's important to have it almost more behind the flute than underneath the flute is not only does this allow your wrist to have a more natural curve, which will release the lock on your tendons so that your fingers can move more easily. Obviously, you need to have it underneath to a degree just so that it doesn't just fall forward. But you also need to trust that when you have your fingers in the right position, it is going to work. I know it can be scary to just like sit here and do that, but that's all you need to do. That's all you need to do. You just need to hold on to it with your thumb, and you just need to believe in your thumb. Another really important reason for having your thumb in this position is it keeps your right hand from rotating one way or the other so that you're able to maximize the stretch of your pinky, allowing you to more easily switch between the D sharp, C, and B. Because if you have your thumb too much in like this, it makes your wrist want to rotate this way and will result in you having to really stretch your fingers to be able to reach the lower keys. Equally though, if you have it too far to the other side, you get the opposite problem. This is what it looks like when you have your thumb too far back. Like, it brings your wrist too far in and it just causes your pinky to be too high up on the keys. You know, as I'm doing this video, I'm realizing that the most important parts of your hand position are really just your thumbs. Finally, I'm going to address the elephant in the room, your finger height. So for this, I suggest practicing scales very slowly while never having your fingers leave the keys completely. And just get used to having them very low, but equally low to each other. Think of it this way. If you have two Matchbox cars that are going the same speed and are going to the same destination, they will only arrive there at the same time if they go from the same starting point. If they are going the same speed and going to the same place, but one is farther away, obviously it's going to take longer for that car to get there than the other box. It is extremely difficult to think of 9 separate fingers and adjusting to each height individually. It is much easier to think of this as a single organism that just has shifting parts. You already have enough going on in terms of reading the music, interpreting the music, and making sure you're playing in the right key. You don't need to be thinking about how fast you have to move your index finger versus how fast you move your ring finger, because this one is a centimeter higher than this one. Another way to practice your finger height that I actually got one of my students to do recently is to get a ruler, so one of those long rulers that are kind of made of rubber and are a little bit bendy. And because it's made of rubber, it'll stick to your skin a little bit better, and you place it on the tops of your fingers once you're set up. You'll need someone to come and help you out for this. Like, just set up your hands in the proper position and then get them to put the ruler on top of it. And you have to play your scales or piece whilst making sure the ruler doesn't fall off. And this is a tangible way to really feel how much your fingers are moving. So again, that tip was when you master your hand position, your technique will fly much easier, allowing you to focus more on musicality. I hope you find this week's tip helpful. I hope that it didn't come off too much as a rant. You can tell I'm extremely passionate about hand position. I'll see you all next week. Flute happy and have a happy hand position. As I'm sure many people already know, I am a really big hockey fan, and I've been having a little bit of difficulty accepting that my team isn't doing so hot this year. Luckily, last year I got a free bobblehead of one of my favorite players, and I think he agrees with me. What do you think, Mark? Gotta fix our defense? Yeah, I thought so too.